Hey everybody, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to determine who is the best enforcer, Richard Harrow, Chris Partlow, or Furio the Beekeeper Giunta. At least that's the nickname that seemed to be the most popular in my episode evaluating him. Of course, all of this is assuming that you are not married to Carmela, so let me know who you would take as the enforcer for your crew down in the comments. In determining who is the best, or perhaps most suited to your style, we will be evaluating their effectiveness by comparing them in terms of their ease of access to targets, their ability to get the job done and dispose of the body afterwards, as well as their levels of loyalty, before ending with an evaluation on how each of them would be best utilized. Now, if we are going to compare them accurately in all aspects of their effectiveness, then we must first address the elephant in the room regarding Richard Harrow.
How do I look?
You look weird. You look fucking weird.
Obviously, hiding in plain sight is out of the question, as is going to bars or parties to try and hunt someone down without being noticed. It would also make it much easier for him to be identified after the job is done.
That guy with the mask. The fuck was that?
As well as make it easier for someone to frame him by putting on their own half mask, since that's all most people would notice. But Richard's face does have some potential advantages, which we will get into later. When it comes to Chris Partlow, while he is not nearly as noticeable as Richard, he still has a pretty demonic look in his eye that's bound to draw attention. That being said, assuming everyone is judged during their own time, he would still have a clear advantage over the others in terms of access, blending in, and disappearing. He blends in well in Baltimore, and he would blend in well in New Jersey, maybe not as well as Slim Charles, who's clean cut, while Chris has more of a rough look.
Like a bunch of spiders just having a meeting on his head.
But he would still fit in just fine. Furio, on the other hand, would stick out like a sore thumb in the projects of Baltimore.
They're gonna hop out and say, look at the boy over there with the pretty ass ponytail. Get him.
When comparing their respective abilities to do the job itself, there are three main things to keep in mind. First, some of the downside of Richard's face is mitigated by the fact that he can actually do the job without being seen because he's a professionally trained sniper. Unlike the other two, who would have to get somewhat close to take out a target, Richard can take them out from a distance, which would make being outside dangerous for an enemy regardless of how many bodyguards they had around. The second thing to keep in mind is their body counts. While we know Chris and Richard have over 30 and 60 respectively, we don't really know what Furio's is. However, we see in The Sopranos that the gangsters in Italy are far more serious than the ones in New Jersey, and since Furio was a top enforcer there, I think we're safe in assuming that he is one badass gangster who can do the job well. The third thing to keep in mind is the nature of their body counts. While all of Chris and Furio's kills would have been essentially street kills, the majority of Richard's were in combat, which is a completely different dynamic that will come into play heavily as we move into comparing their loyalty. With Richard, it's not as much about the money as it is whether or not he likes you and or feels like he's part of something. If not, then he's probably the flakiest of the bunch and may decide not to complete a mission or even drop out entirely.
I don't want any more of it.
However, if he does, then he's the type of guy who, even after you're dead, will storm into a brothel packed full of gangsters and kill almost all of them to rescue your son.
You need a dead jackal type motherfucker basically to do some shit like that.
Now, to be fair, Furio also stormed a whorehouse, although it wasn't to rescue a kid and there weren't any gangsters in there besides him. When it comes to Furio's loyalty, and again this is all under the assumption that you are not married to Carmela, his loyalty is a lot like his body count in that they are both back in Italy, so it's really hard to verify. That being said, just like his body count, with what we know of and see from him in Italy, there is no reason to doubt that he would step up when need be. In moving from someone we have no reason to doubt would step up to someone who we know will, we run into Chris Partlow. Of the three, Chris's loyalty is the most visible and least conditional. We see him willingly take a life sentence, allowing Marlowe to go free, and you don't have to worry about him stopping short of completing a job. A large part of the reason he's so effective in completing those jobs is his meticulous approach to setting them up. He makes sure to always be the first to arrive, and even explains it to Michael during training.
That's why I show up to a job an hour before, sometimes two. But nobody's setting up on me while I'm setting up on them.
Unfortunately, for as good as Chris is at setting up and executing the act itself, he is terrible when it comes to disposing of the bodies afterwards. Even in a city as poor as Baltimore, boarding up dead bodies in vacants was a terrible long-term plan, and not surprisingly, it wasn't long before they were found. That being said, this isn't an issue that would have been as pressing for the other two. With Richard, Due to the lack of forensic capabilities, limited police resources, and massive corruption of the times, hiding bodies wasn't nearly as important. Of course, with Furio, he was part of a network that already had systems in place to take care of that sort of thing, unlike Chris, who had to be his own network. Furio's connections are arguably the most valuable thing that any of them bring to the table, and this is where we begin to compare them in terms of the capacities in which they can be used. Furio would be much like a top prospect in that we haven't actually seen much of his work firsthand, but he comes with high accolades from a reputable place, and if he ends up being like what it seems like he is, then he is by far the most valuable due to his connections. Even if we completely disregard his American connections since he's part of your crew now, he still has them in Europe. Those connections open up possibilities for lucrative international business, bringing in overseas hitmen, as well as potentially hiding some of yours over there. With Chris, even if we assume he has an international connection with the Greeks through Marlowe, it's still only one, and a very one-sided one at that. If the Greeks decided to sever contact for any reason, he would be SOL, whereas Furio wouldn't have to wait to be contacted by his overseas connections, he could just go directly to any one of them over there. While Chris may not possess Furio's international potential, he does represent something very valuable for anyone who would want him in their crew. He is the quintessential textbook enforcer for his time and place. He fits right in, unlike Furio or Richard, who are either uncomfortable with their surroundings or themselves, and that's what sets Chris apart. So if you're looking for a loyal textbook enforcer who fits right in, and are willing to accept the fact that he will never be much more than that, then Chris might be your guy. With Richard Harrow, as we've already discussed, a lot depends on his level of loyalty towards you, and his face does present many problems, but there is one other potential benefit that it might bring. Combined with his sniping ability, his distinct appearance and voice could make him even more of a boogeyman figure than either of the other two. After all, once the man with half a face is after you, it's not even safe to be outside anymore. Well, let me know who you would pick and how you would utilize them down in the comments. Thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.